but please do use the chat function to ask any questions or raise your hand when we open for the floor. I will now hand you over to Jim Longhurst, who is a Climate Commissioner and Assistant Vice-Chancellor at University of the West of England. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Fiona, and good morning and welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Commissioners, we're delighted you're able to join us today for what we have in prospect, an exciting, informative, and hopefully an event in which you engage and challenge and critique and offer all sorts of contributions to help enhance the work of the Commission. Now, the Commission is perhaps a unique alliance between the HE and the FE sector, and I think we've made some very important alliances within the Commission that have together brought us to a position where we can share what are the proceeds of the work thus far. Of course, you'll all be aware this was intended to be a contribution that would be made at the COP in this month, but we're all aware that that is now November of next year. So what we will be talking about is how we continue that work. But where have we got to 1 year on is the subject of today. And this unique alliance isn't just about the sector, this combined sectors organizations. It's also an alliance of university leaders and our students. And it's our students as graduates or of higher and further education who will live through our changing climate. And as you would expect, our students are highly engaged in this important debate. And we will soon be able to see and hear about the work that they have been doing. Sorry, a phone would go off at the most inopportune time. So our students are critical to this. It is their future, perhaps more than many of ours. And we are, through our work, developing targets for the sector, developing resources for the combined sector, all of which we hope will enable universities and colleges, no matter where they are on their journey towards decarbonisation and adaptation, will find something to help them to understand, to learn from others who have perhaps been earlier on the journey, and all of which will lead us to a position where a combined sector can both be a powerful advocate for further change, but also demonstrate the actions that will work at pace and will lead us to what we recommend as a scope 1 and 2 target being achieved by this combined sector by around 2030, and to bring scope 3 into the target setting as soon as possible thereafter. Some institutions are signaling that might be possible by 2030. Others may take a little time to get there, but there will be resources and there will be support from within the proceeds of the Commission's work that will help all organisations move to that position. So I think that is enough by way of introduction. I would now like us to move on and to hear from the student commissioners, and the Commission's Climate Commission officer, Sonia Perez, is now going to take over and start our discussion on my year of climate action. So Sonia, over to you.
Thanks so much, Jim, for that great introduction. And so just to expand on a bit of what Jim said, it's always been, video's not showing. It's always been really important for the Commission to see the student voice and have the student voice as an equal and important voice. And so the Commission is directed by commissioners and supported by a council. And within these groups, we are really fortunate to have a number of students leading and advising us by sharing their invaluable insight and their experiences as students. So in the past year, we've held student-led discussion groups to produce a report on the future of education for UNESCO. We've ran a student survey, we've produced a podcast called Climate Chats with Students, and we've ensured opportunities for students to feed into our work, so including chairing meetings and participating on panels as panelists. So we thought for this one-year event, it would be really beneficial to hear from our student commissioners and their reflections on the past year. So I'll be speaking with Manveer Gill and Marta Crispo, who are both student commissioners, for the next 15-ish minutes on their experience. So welcome, Manveer and Marta.
Good morning, everyone.
So I'm just going to start with a brief basic question. Why did you decide to get involved with the commission, and why is this work so important to you?
I'll let Marta go first.
Marta, do you want to go?
Sorry. Yeah, I think that I believe that if we want to reach a net zero target as a whole sector, it's really important that we work all together rather than at individual level. And I think that this means indeed working together with the FE sector and HE sector, but also with students and staff all working together. I think that working together, we can learn a lot from each other. I believe there's a lot of really successful stories out there from both students and officers in their advancing the sustainability within their institution. And I think in this way, we can also help those institutions that are a bit behind in their sustainability agenda. And I guess that the current pandemic just shows us how, as a whole sector, if we want, we can reach quite rapid and effective change in a short period of time. So I'm sure we can do, as a sector, certainly the same in tackling the climate crisis.
Thanks, Marta. Manveer, what are your thoughts?
Well, I just think that climate change is the defining challenge that this world faces, at least in the long run. And if some town, city, or country is not significantly affected right now, then it's only a matter of time before they are. So it's kind of hard to stand by and watch. And I want to be one of the many people using their skills, their positions to help tackle one of the facets around the climate emergency. And so this commission just seems like a natural avenue, or seemed at the time and still does. Being someone, well, I guess I was a student and my experience was quite limited to kind of around the university. Luckily, interacting with a lot of stakeholders around the University of Warwick. And yeah, I just think that the commission has kind of been a great expansion on that experience and the skills that I've learned there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I really resonate with what, Marta, you said about collaboration. I think that's really at the core of our commission. And so moving ahead, in the past year of the commission, we've done so much together. And so what are you most proud of, and what has been an experience that you'll remember and that has been good for climate action to you?
Okay, well, I have to say that I think in just a year, the Climate Commission was able to accomplish many things, and that was really great. But I think I feel to highlight two main things. For me, I really like the work that was done on mapping the research center across the UK, like working on the climate change. I think this is a really first important step and will be really crucial in understanding which are the key action needed to tackle the crisis and also influence future policies. And I also would like to highlight a second work that has been done for the Climate Action Roadmap for the FE sector, and also the Climate Action Toolkit for the HE sector, which I suppose will be available soon. I think they are both really important work because still I highlight the main action that each institution can take to respond to the climate emergency. But at the same time, I think it's really important for the sector at this moment, and it's also really mainly important for those institutions that still are not so advanced and quite behind in their sustainability agenda. So these are, I think, the main things I'm most proud of. But as having said so, I think there's still a lot of work that as a climate commission we can do, and as a whole sector we can do to actually reach this net zero target.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's something for everyone here with the commission's work is also how Manveer, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I think Marta's actually stolen my answers there, but the FE roadmap and HE toolkit, I think they've really got the potential to be critical resources to assist universities on their individual journeys, as you put it, to net carbon neutrality and to being pioneers of action. So I think they're great. But I think something that I always say is that just having students partake in designing the work and the evidence gathering sessions that the commission has done, it's just a great example of co-creation between institutional leaders and students. And that's what we need across the board if we're to ensure stakeholder participation and making sure that everyone's voices are heard as we design transitions moving forward. So yeah, that'll be my answer.
Yeah, I think about that, I think one of the key events was the governor and chair event that we had, where we had student governors speak to institutional governors. I thought that was absolutely amazing to see that integration and collaboration. Yeah, so we have about 4 more minutes left. So I'm just going to ask, are there any key lessons that you've learned in the past year on, from the Climate Commission, and also, you know, looking for climate action?
Should I still go first, or leave Manvir this time?
Okay, Manvir, do you want to go first?
Why not? I think that there are, it's shown me that there are a vast number of stakeholders that play a role in the functioning, not just of universities, but I think in organizations as a whole. But I think universities are quite unique in that they're almost kind of a hybrid between kind of a company and a city in many ways. So I think that trying to reconcile the views across those different stakeholders can be quite difficult, but it's still an important process. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned around how to interact and try and come to a consensus and act with that in mind. Yeah,
that's been a big one for me too. Marta?
Yeah, I also want to agree with what Manvir said about, I think for me, there are 2 small key lessons. The first one was indeed trying to understand how to communicate differently with all the different stakeholder groups. And it's still something that I don't have the skill, but I think it's really important if we want to make an effective change. And I think a more specific one that I noticed a lot in different meetings that we had was not all institutions as kind of this sort of committee, like a climate or sustainability committee as it's called, where students and staff and governors' bodies all work together to oversee and coordinate the climate action within the institution. And I think it's such an important thing that at one point in the near future, all institutions kind of set, because if we want to keep coordinate this response as a whole sector, it's really important that all institutions kind of set this type or a sort of committee. That would be my 2 main lessons.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so we have just 2 minutes left. So I'm going to ask a wrap-up question, which is, now we're looking, so a big part of the event is also we're looking ahead to COP26, which is a really important event for climate action. So how do you see the Commission continuing to engage with students in the next year looking to COP26, and what do you want to see?
I will just briefly go first. I think what's important that I noticed in the past few months is that the Commission could invite or like just include in the future conversation those students organizations that actually represent much more students across the UK. I think it's really important to actually increase increase the relationship and advance in it, because as a student climate commissioner, I think it's good that my voice is heard, but I also believe it's important to invite those students who represent the voice of many more students in the Climate Commission. That would be my input.
Yeah, thank you, Marta.
I think for me, I'll try and keep it brief, but it's a difficult time at the moment, not for universities and therefore for students too. So I think trying to make sure that climate change remains a high item on the agenda across the year is important, and making sure that we do get that representation, as Marta has said, from different students across the UK as the Commission goes forward before COP26. I think that's a big one for me, maintaining the momentum there.
Yeah, I think that's good. We have some momentum now. We have to keep going. I just want to thank both of you so much for all your work in the past year and for starting off this event so brilliantly. It's been really lovely to hear your insight. I'm going to hand it over to Jim now to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Sonia.
Well, thank you very much, Marta and Manvir, and Sonia as well, for chairing that part of today's proceedings. Really insightful comments, reflections, and challenges for the future coming from our student Commissioner, so thank you again. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable, the Lord Deben, Chair of the Committee on Climate Change. I'm sure well known to all of those attending this morning's event. Now, Lord Deben spoke at our launch event this time last year, and one of the many comments he made really resonated with me. He said reaching net zero emissions is essential, it is feasible, and as a sector dedicated knowledge and thought leadership, it is rightfully expected. There was the challenge thrown down to this combined sector, and I'm delighted that Lord Deben is able to join us today and to comment on the work thus far of the Commission, and also the enormity of the challenge that we face, even though it is essential and feasible. Lord Deben, thank you very much. Over to you.
We are. I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you very much for inviting me. And I liked the opportunity to hear what some of your students reflected on in their year of work. I suppose the first thing one really wants to say is that there is a huge challenge for the centres of education and enlightenment. We are seeing the American election play itself out. And what we're seeing there is the clash between science and knowledge, intellectual understanding and respect, and those who just don't want to know. And it's a very serious worry that here in the 21st century, we should be fighting the sort of battles which we might have thought had been left behind in history, certainly since the Enlightenment, or indeed since the 12th century Renaissance. It's a very tough thing for those of us who've been brought up to respect the rationality that comes from research and understanding, to be faced with those who find that of no importance. What matters is what they feel and what they would like to be true. So we have, I think, an even more acute sense of the role of students of universities and colleges all around the country and their future role because of the training that has taken place. And it has been a very difficult year for them. Lockdown has worked perhaps even less well for them than for many other people. And now we come into another lockdown. The concentration of people upon COVID and upon its reactions and results can lead them away from the other great challenge. But interestingly, what COVID has done much more widely, and I can say that from the work that I do on sustainability, is to make more and more people recognize that these big systemic risks, of which climate change is the greatest, do have to be faced. I mean, we've always known that there could be a pandemic. It's been on anybody's risk register, but people have not really taken it seriously. It's one of those things that you have to account for, you have to think for, but actually it isn't the thing that you're thinking about as you work towards your first quarter's results. Well, now it is. And with it has come an understanding of environment, social, governance issues, which people have forgotten or pushed to the back. Investors are asking questions about the companies in which they invest, much more than they were before, and demanding those companies have a sustainability program. So for students and you working in this battle, you've come in at a time in which there is a readier audience than perhaps you've had before. And when the Climate Change Committee produces its 6th carbon budget, which will be very tough, will need a great deal to achieve it, but is feasible and is financeable and is absolutely necessary if we are to ward off the worst of climate change. And so I hope that if I were setting the big role of students, it's to help us make the 6th carbon budget the guiding light of every activity in the country. And of course, the first of those activities is the way in which universities operate, in which student bodies operate, and in which students themselves operate. And I do want to have a go at you on that, because it really is a question of starting with yourselves. I don't believe that you can help others to walk the walk unless you're walking the walk yourself. And therefore, there are all sorts of questions that we have to ask about students and which they'll want to answer. Nearly 90% of students have a deal with Amazon. I wonder how many of them actually say to themselves, is it environmentally sensible to insist that a product that I don't need tomorrow comes tomorrow? What am I doing about ensuring that my purchasing activities are as carbon neutral as they can be? That's another thing to add to the not letting the water run when you're cleaning your teeth, or boiling too much water when you want a cup of coffee. They're tiny things. Each one in its own right does very little. But if the whole student body did it and convinced others to do it, then those mundane, unimportant things could mean that we could make a huge difference to the emissions that we have, without in any way interfering with the sort of life that we want to lead. And that's the second thing, really. We need, as young people, I say we, I'm not young, but you need as young people to ensure that this whole campaign is serious, but it is not miserable. One thing that will not convince the world is a whole lot of misery Martins claiming doom and gloom. What we have to do is to point to people that it'll be hard, but it can be done. It can be done within 2% of the gross national product. Now, I don't much like the GNP as a measurement of the wealth of a nation, but it's a useful one here. So we know we can do it, and we can do it, and we can do it and still have the sort of life which it is we've been reasonably grown up to expect. We don't need to be cold in the winter. We don't need not to have hot water. We don't need to find ourselves living on lentils. What we have to do is to live more reasonably in relationship to the planet which we've been given. There's a very important insight in the Pope's encyclical on Laudato Si, called Laudato Si. And in it, he says, you must look at climate change as the, that's the thing that always happens when you do this, the telephone, which shouldn't be on. It is, you have to look at climate change as a symptom of what we've done to the world. It's the way we've used our resources. It's the way that we have reduced the fertility of our soil. It's the way that we have put people into poverty whom we could have brought out of poverty. It's the way that the rich have been greedy and caused the pollution which itself has become climate change. We must look at the disease and not at the symptoms. And that means very, very considerable change, because it's not just a transition to the new world, it's actually a transition to a world which is very different. COVID has been useful for that. More and more people realize that you're not going to go back to where you were. And that's very exciting for students, because you're going to build a nation and a world which will be, right from the beginning, clearly very, very different. And most generations don't have that chance. It is a very unusual thing for a revolutionary change to take place without the bloodshed or the war which normally precedes it or succeeds it. We have a real chance to change the world. And it is your generation that is going to make my generation and younger people recognize just how much has to be done. Now, I want really to say just two more things. I am very impressed with what students are doing. Some of the most important moves in the country are happening in universities, not just with students, but with people who are teaching and who are administering universities. What Leeds is doing and Cambridge, what Bristol and West of England, and a whole host of others is really exciting and will make a huge difference. But it needs to be done together with the rest of the community. Students need to be the harbingers of all this for the whole of their generation, because being included is absolutely necessary if we are to win the battle. Inclusiveness is part of the whole question of justice. And justice, too, is the second point. Most students, like most English people actually, have a natural sense of fairness. And the present situation is not fair. Climate change is affecting the poorest most. It's affecting the oldest, the least able to defend themselves. It's affecting the countries which have least, and now they have less. We rich countries that have made our wealth out of pollution have got to pay that cost. And I'm afraid it's your generation that's going to have to pay a very large amount of that cost. But when we hear people suggesting that it's necessary to pay recompense for slavery and for all sorts of other things, I think the recompense which we have to pay, because it's one that will actually change the world, is we're paying the recompense for the wealth which we have created through polluting the world and for bringing our planet close to extinction. That's why the radical view of fighting climate is so important. This is not just a rearrangement of the chairs on the deck. This is actually realizing that we've got to live differently, individually, as student communities, as university communities, and as the community as a whole, both nationally and internationally. We've recently made that more difficult by leaving the European Union. We've lost one of the very best ways which we had of influencing the world and taking leadership. But we're going to have to find ways of making up for that really ridiculous mistake. One of those will be to show that in COP26, which begins, as you know, in Glasgow at the end of next year, that in COP26, Britain is going to be a leader. And to do that, we have very soon to offer an even bigger change than we've offered so far. We must lead the world in how much we are prepared to do. Because after all, we invented the Industrial Revolution, and so bear a bigger responsibility perhaps than any other nation. And it's a good thing that we're having this crucial COP in our country, in Scotland, when we can make amends. And so far, the government has shown itself willing to do those things. I'm known not to be the biggest fan of the particular nature and policies of this government. But that makes it easier for me to be able to say that on climate change, there is a real consensus, and the government has committed itself to do the right things. Problem now is it's got to do them and keep on doing them. And the public has got to support it. And that's where, once again, you come in. You can make all the difference. A student body committed to achieving these ends, to supporting even people they disagree with, if what they are doing is what needs to be done to fight climate change. Determination to make this revolutionary but just, radical but understanding, and above all, intellectually sensible, showing that we're doing it because it's true, because the threat is real, because we know. And that's the final thing we as educated people have got to say, graduates and undergraduate students of all kinds. Knowledge implies responsibility. When you read the first chapter of Genesis, and there was the myth of Eve eating the apple, the key story is that once she knew, she was responsible. When she knew, she had to take measures and react and do the right thing. Knowledge is the creator of responsibility. We didn't know why the Black Death was spreading, and we couldn't fight it or take responsibility for it. We do know about climate change. We do know how it's caused. And because we know, we have to fight it. And because you are professionally in the know as students, you should be at the forefront. And I thank you for all that you are doing to take on your responsibility.
Lord Deben, thank you very much indeed for that insightful set of observations, but encapsulating within it a huge challenge to our students and our future graduates for both personal responsibility and actions, but also to use their power to encourage others, particularly their institutions, but their wider community. And there are well over 4.5 million students in this combined FE and HE sector. It's a powerful, motivating body, and with another 500,000 academics and other staff in institutions, we're heading to 8% of the population. That's if we could use that power, and that's really at the heart of the Climate Commission, we could mobilize and use that power in the ways that you have suggested. Then maybe we will reach that goal. The other part, though, I did want just to touch upon was the importance of a just transition that you spoke about. And I think that really resonates with our student commissioners, but also with the wider student bodies that we've engaged with. Now, we did say in our agenda that there will be an opportunity for some questions for Lord Deben. I'm going to ask my colleague Sonia if she would also scan those who have put a hand up to ask questions. I'm looking through the participants list to see if anyone has raised a hand. I think people will be digesting and thinking how best to act upon your wise counsel, Lord Deben. I haven't yet seen a hand up in the participants list, but maybe if I could then invite Marta or Manveer on behalf of students to respond and maybe question Lord Deben. We have around about 5 to 10 minutes, depending on the number of questions. Timing, I should say, colleagues, is always a little flexible in events of this nature. We will, if we can, go with the flow of the narrative as it emerges. But Manveer or Marta, would you like to respond while shy colleagues think about their questions?
Well, I guess with you, Lord Deben, being in a very unique position, I'd love to know what the Climate Committee in particular are planning ahead for COP26 and how we might be pushing the UK government ahead over the next year.
Well, the 6th carbon budget will be very tough, and we will be challenging the UK government immediately to put that to Parliament. As you know, the situation is that we present the budgets, Parliament then votes on it. If Parliament accepts it, then those budgets become statutory. They have to be met, and they can't be changed without the Climate Change Committee's agreement. So it's very important that the 6th carbon budget, which will take us towards the end of the 2030s, is in place as rapidly as possible, not least because that's a real base for the government then to do the work that it needs to do to bring other countries on board, because it will show that it has a proper, direct and legally binding route to reducing our emissions to net zero by 2050, and that it's not just talk, it is actually there enshrined in the law. So that's our major job just at the moment. We will then be following that up with a constant range of activities to keep the government's feet to the fire. That's our job, that's what we do. And I suspect that we will have a very great deal to say about new build of housing, reaching proper standards. We'll be talking about heating in homes, which is really important to change that to something which is much more climate friendly. And of course, we'll be very involved in land use and how we're going to get the fertility of the soil back so that it can sequestrate carbon.
Brilliant, thank you. Don't mean to commandeer the chairing, Sonia, but I think Alison Green might have a question.
Thank you. Yes, Alison Green, former academic. I'm now Executive Director of Scientist Warning. I'd like to start by just perhaps challenging your point, Lord Deben, about the government actually showing willing in terms of tackling the climate crisis. I believe that the Committee on Climate Change recently recommended to the government that they should prepare for 4 degrees of warming by 2100. That doesn't sound to me like a government that is acting proportionately. So that's just a comment. My question to you is, should universities themselves do more? And I say this because whilst I take your point that of course students should walk the walk, talk the talk, but I feel it's unfair to put too much responsibility on the burden of our students. I think that they are doing a magnificent job, and I think if anything, it's universities that are letting them down. So for example, this particular commission has tended to focus its conversations on universities achieving net zero in terms of operations. To me, I feel that's a lost opportunity, in that I feel that the university sector, not just within the UK, but globally, needs to urgently reconsider the fundamental purpose of universities. So I'd just like to put that to you as a question: should universities do more?
Well, first of all, just your first comment, I mean, that was That's the opposite of what you say. What we said to the government was, first of all, we in Britain have got to aim at and indeed achieve net zero. But the way in which the rest of the world is going at the moment, it may be that at the same time as doing that, you've got to make sure that we are prepared for a 4-degree rise in temperature. Because if everybody else doesn't do what we want, then the real problem is that we will still be affected by it. That's why I get so angry about Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump is changing my climate. And that's why Mr. Trump has not just reporting to the American people, he has done more harm to the world's climate in the last 4 years than any other individual I can think of. So the reason why we were saying that was that the trouble is that we may, for simple adaptation reasons, have to face a situation in which Paris is not successful. I want Paris to be successful, and the government has committed itself to make Paris successful. But if you're sensible, you also prepare for the worst outcome, and that was what we were saying. It's also a warning. You don't want to get there. It's going to be very nasty and very expensive. One of the things we have to explain to people is that it may be quite expensive to fight climate change. It's a lot more expensive not to fight. Now, as far as what universities, I think some universities are doing very well, but you make an important point. This is a holistic situation. We have to look at all that we do. We have to ask ourselves all sorts of questions. Maybe, for example, we will learn a good deal more distance is a sensible way to use our resources. Maybe we'll learn all kinds of things that we didn't know, trying to make universities work in a COVID period. But I think the best of universities work, and I take Leeds as an example, universities in Bristol, that the working with the local authorities so that you become part of the community's answer is a very important thing. I wouldn't blame all universities, but not all of them by any means have been following the kind of route that we've seen from Cambridge, that we've seen certainly, as I say, from Leeds, that we are beginning to see in Edinburgh and Belfast. And I'd really like quite a number of them to do a great deal more. And I rather suspect we will start to call some of them out, those that have not yet understood that the climate crisis is their crisis.
Thank you very much, Lord Deben. Colleagues, as ever, we do need to move on. So again, thank you, Lord Deben, and thank you for the opportunity you've given us for some questions there as well. And I'm sure the questioning amongst our colleagues will go on for some time. But we do, I'm afraid, need to move on to the next agenda item, which is to consider the outputs of the Commission thus far, and to hear from my fellow commissioners, Joy Carter, who's the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Winchester, and Steve Frampton, who is the Chair of the Association of Colleges Board of Service. So with no further ado, Steve and Joy, can I hand over to you?
Thank you, Jim, and good morning to you all. So we're here to tell you something about outputs to date. This isn't all our outputs, but just to give you a flavour of the sort of things we're doing. So I'd like to speak about 2 of them, and then I'll hand over to Steve to speak about some other ones. So first of all, the Higher Education Climate Action Toolkit. This is something which is for every higher education institution, no matter where you are on your sustainability journey. Can I have the next slide, please? So how it's structured, there are some themes which you see on the left-hand side of the slide, and the themes are leadership and governance, campus management, teaching, community engagement, and research and knowledge exchange. And within each of those themes, there are what we call critical elements. So, for example, under leadership and governance, we've got data gap analysis, divestment, speaking out, distributed leadership, those sorts of things. And under campus management, to give you a few examples, food, water, transport, buildings, community engagement is what it sounds like, both with public authorities, but also importantly with business. And teaching, it's about carbon literacy. It's about mainstreaming sustainability. And it's also about things that we don't often think about, like field trips and the carbon footprint of teaching in that way as well. And then, of course, research and knowledge exchange, and that will include not only the nature of the research that's being done and how it's being used, but also the carbon footprint of that research. So there's lots of critical elements underneath that. And next slide, please. And for each of these critical elements that sit underneath the themes, there's a wonderful resource base, things that we all might find useful, and also time and cost. And those two, of course, are really important. So it's a fantastic practical document which every university, every higher education institution, no matter where you are in your journey, can use. Next one, please. So I'm an environmental geochemist, so I couldn't resist a picture of a rock, but this is to tell you that, that this document isn't set in stone. It's not set in stone, it's a live document. It's a document which will change, which will adapt, which will get new information, and which all of you can contribute to on an ongoing basis. Next one, please. We've already consulted a lot about this document. In October, the council and the sector were consulted on the first draft. And at the moment, it's being edited and soon we'll launch the first iteration. We hope you will own it alongside us. You'll feel it's a document that you own as well as the Commission and that you will use within your institutions. Next one, please. So now I want to move to another output, and in a way this addresses Alison's question that she asked earlier, and also perhaps some of the things that Lord Deben said. Lord Deben said this is a huge challenge for centres of education and enlightenment. And he also said, and I quote, knowledge implies responsibility. And this is exactly what we're trying to do with this output. And Alison challenged us about don't look inwardly, look outwardly and speak loudly. Next one, please. So what we've tried to do, and we continue to do, is map the research centres in the UK. And we find there's an awful lot of them out there. I was shocked how many there are. We've got 188 so far, and that so far is important because we keep discovering new ones that we hadn't known about. And they're in all parts of the sector, and they're interdisciplinary, as you might expect. So here are just a very small handful of them. The Cambridge Centre for Climate Science, Glasgow Caledonian, doing lots of fantastic work in this field, the Centre for Climate Justice. Many of you will know the Tyndall Centre Partnership of many universities who are working hard on this agenda. In Leeds, as we've heard, and the King's Climate Hub, and so many more. And of course, I couldn't resist showing you an image from my own one, the Centre for Climate Action at Winchester. Next one, please. Came across this the other day, keep calm and follow the science, but actually I'd say something different. I'd say keep calm and follow the academic evidence, because it really is interdisciplinary. And what we need to do is speak with one interdisciplinary evidence-based voice. And we need to speak loud and clear, not just to our own sector, but to the government, to the community, and internationally as well. Next one, please. And we're starting to map where these centres are. It's quite difficult to put them all on one map, but we're starting to do that. You can see they're all over the UK, and we're adding more every day. And our plan is that we should work with our membership organisations to find the key messages that all these centres are wanting to give to government and the world. And in doing so, we can speak to other membership organisations from higher education, from other countries in the world, and hopefully affect not just our own government, but other governments as well. So this is some work that I'm personally really excited about, and it was good to hear Marta and others say that they're excited about this too. It's work in progress, and it's a pleasure to share this with you this morning. And that's it from me, and I'd like to pass over to Steve now to hear about some other of the outputs.
Thank you very much, Joy. I'm going to have a look at the FE Climate Action Roadmap as one of the key outputs now. And then we'll move on to have a look at the targets, and then we'll have an interactive poll, Joy, I think. So the FE roadmap was based upon a collaborative piece of work that we did with Learning from HE and particularly our Scottish FE partners, where there'd been substantial funding for this work over the previous 6 to 9 years that we hadn't had in the UK for English colleges. But it was generous of them, I think, to help with the work. We started with that, and then we co-constructed the work with principals and student commissioners. And if it wouldn't have been for the help of NOUS, who did a freebie for the FE sector, we wouldn't have the work that we did. A fabulous piece of work that we were able to launch in May. The FE sector in England had long wanted this toolkit, and it was one of the barriers to stop us, I think, making progress. So we were able to produce this very accessible and action-orientated document with the help of NOUS and the students, and launched in May. Not the best time to launch anything, actually, when you think about it, with the challenges that we had in a COVID-dominated world and all the financial challenges in the FE sector. The 70 colleges took it up straight away, of the 250 in our sector. So 25% did and worked on it over the summer. It's a rich source for them, as they say, because it's got a self-assessment tool to start off with. Where are you actually now? To audit current performance and to look at ways forward at whatever level you are. It's really a sort of beginners, an advanced and an excellent set of actions. And to be frank, most of our sector recognised we were very much at the beginners and learning stage. It also meant that people could set their own action plans based on it. We've now got over 100 English colleges engaged with this and more daily, because we relaunched it in September with a series of specialist webinars for principals, estate managers and student governors. And more importantly, I think to show some real leadership, we've adopted it as an AOC board, we've signed up to the UN Accord, we've agreed to implement the roadmap ourselves and become completely carbon neutral by 2030, a hugely ambitious target, but one that many of our sector have taken up. The most important thing I think about it is that it is truly a collaborative agenda. It's a collaborative action plan that encourages FE colleges to work with their communities, their HE partners, and the rest of the educational ecosystem, particularly their secondary and primaries. Because what we're after is collective civic responsibility and action, and not just individual college performance. It's prompted all sorts of incredible actions and very quickly. The FE sector is hugely agile and nimble. And last week during Colleges Week, 3 Brighton colleges collaboratively pledged to move through all 3 levels of the action plan, 1 per year, supported by an excellent local MP, of course, who's Caroline, who's a member of the Green Party. You might say that gives them a bit of a natural advantage. But it's still an amazing target to set, to move that quickly through it and work collaboratively with the rest of the civic community and the education ecosystem. It's also hugely exciting now that we do have, I think, a curriculum with CLP, Carbon Literacy Project, which will enable all students and staff and governors to access and actually achieve an accredited qualification at minimal cost, so that we're confident about the knowledge base of this. And the other thing is it's going to be driven, as people have already said today, I think by and large by our students. In fact, yesterday we had a training day for student governors in our sector. 63 of them were trained, and half the day was on climate change at their bequest. Because let's remind ourselves why we're all doing this, as we talked about already. Zurich had an amazing international conference on climate change for young people, 7 to 17, last month. The key finding of it was that of the 2.4 million young people they interviewed, 7 to 17 in our country, are current, in our case, FE learners, but also our students for the future, for the HE and the FE sector. Of that 2.4 million, 72% of them identify climate change as the most important issue. They take a long-term view because it's going to be all of their future. COVID was only 9%. The second was actually mental health. So we're very clear that we're responding to a genuine identified need by our current and future students. I'm hugely proud of our sector, actually, considering all of the work and challenges that they face at the moment, for taking this on board. Over 100 of them already, and that's, like I say, of the 250, 4 or 5 more every week, working in a co-constructed, collaborative way, not in a competitive league table environment, and making huge progress at this very challenging time, and in partnership, particularly with their communities. If we can move on, then the second thing I think I'd like to talk about is about generally how we're getting on with our targets. And we're going to have a short poll on this in just a minute. As a commission, we decided we did need targets. We'll see if you approve of that in 1 second. But obviously there are primarily 3. There's the net zero greenhouse gas emissions for scope 1 and 2 by 2030, as per the IPC recommendations. But can we stress that that's as a minimum? That should, I think, be almost in bold in the target. The second one was to make significant sector action towards reducing scope 3 emissions within the similar time frame, based on, I think, on firstly understanding the baseline and developing a framework for that, and secondly establishing minimum targets that are meaningful. And the third one, of course, was our scope 3 net zero by 2050, and again almost in bold, or before, particularly as devolved by government targets, and to ensure that we use offsetting as a real minimum contribution to that. Now, I think at this stage, we're very keen to have a poll, Joy, aren't we?
Absolutely. And so I hope you're all ready to participate with this. And here it is. How useful do you feel having clear targets is for the sector? And there may be a variety of views on this. So we're going to ask you now to participate in this, and then we're going to have a look at the results. So we'll just pause for a moment while people fill this in, and
just wait 10 more seconds.
Hopefully Sonia's in control of this, I think. And, everybody's able to vote. We'll see if this magic works in a moment. And any minute now, the results are going to come on the screen. And I'm going to, Steve, I'm going to ask you what you make of this. So here you go.
Well, thankfully, it's not as close as the American election, is it? Because I'm sure we're all sitting on a knife edge, if not a climate change explosion, really, depending on that one goes, as Lord Deben said. Absolutely. But I mean, I'm not particularly surprised with this. I think it looks to us like 90% of you are finding it useful or very useful. I think it is, and if you go back to what our student commissioners and Lord Deben have said, we've got to have quite challenging targets, otherwise we'll miss. I do feel they are very challenging, actually, but I think that's where we need to be. As Michelangelo said, we should really set ourselves ambitious targets. If you fall short of a really ambitious one, you're still going to achieve a great deal. If we set relatively meaningless, soft and unchallenging targets of ourselves, what are we going to achieve? So thank you to everybody for contributing to that, and I think we found ourselves the targets to be incredibly useful. As Joy said, I think with all of these things, they are meant to be live, and we'd be interested in feedback, I think, if we don't think they're challenging enough. But we did caveat them all, of course, with the as a minimum and at this stage. And I think the as a minimum gives us plenty of scope to further that work. Now, I think what we'd like to do now, Joy, isn't it? Yes, sorry, come in, Joy.
Sorry, Steve, just want to interject there, if I may, just to say, I absolutely agree with what you say, Steve, but we shouldn't we shouldn't forget there were nearly 10% of the people that responded there to say only somewhat useful. I think it's really important we have a dialogue with those people to see how they feel and how we can modify what we're doing to take into account of them as well. So, so if we can take that away as a learning point, that would be good as well.
I think that's a brilliant idea, and perhaps in the chat we could get that activated so that we can pick up on that as a commission, because we're interested in feedback all the time. Thanks, Joy. And talking of feedback, I think it would be very appropriate to bring in perhaps some reflections of some of the council today. And I think with luck and seamlessly, we hope, we're going to introduce Mel from Fircroft. Are you there, Mel?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, I'm here.
Wonderful. Lovely to see you. And we're going to hand over to you for a couple of minutes for your reflections.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm from Fircroft College, which is an adult education college. Obviously, the FE sector is very wide in the students that it serves, from a significant 16 to 18 population, but also a very significant number of part-time adults who engage in learning. I think our involvement in the Commission has been very, very helpful and useful at both the kind of strategic level, but also very much at an operational level. So enabling conversations to happen with stakeholders and also at governing body around just how important climate change action is for our work. And that culminated in our governing body declaring a climate and ecological emergency at our last governing body meeting. And I think that's really significant, because actually that places a responsibility on us as an educational organisation to really describe very well what we are going to do in terms of facing that challenge. And actually the climate change roadmap has been hugely useful for us in developing our thinking around what are the kind of practical things that we, as a very small organisation in a much bigger sector, can start to do. And that's enabled us to develop, as I say, both key strategic planning, but also some very practical tools, right down to enabling us over COVID to completely reconfigure our food offer, which is now a plant-based food offer, which is going to be, which is now across the organisation. So that kind of ability to test those kind of action orientated things that we need to consider has been really helpful.
Well, thank you hugely for that, and that's very inspirational to hear, I think. Joy, can I hand back to you?
Sure, thank you, Steve. So the University of Gloucestershire has been a leading light in the higher education world for a long time, and it's a real pleasure to welcome the Vice-Chancellor Stephen Marston to give a few comments now and a few reflections at this stage in the proceedings. Stephen.
Thank you, Joy, and good morning, everybody. Hope everybody can hear me. I think from the University of Gloucestershire point of view, this has been a really big part of our agenda, our strategy, our mission for a long time. And I think what the work of the Commission has helped us do is kind of keep the faith in difficult circumstances, keep the agenda running, maintain the profile of the agenda in circumstances where, of course, in lockdown, there is literal lockdown, there's psychological lockdown. There are many, many reasons now to be focused on just getting through today and the difficulties of today, which could leave us less space, time and energy to focus on wider, bigger, longer term issues like climate change and sustainability. So for us here in Gloucestershire, part of the value of the Commission's work has just been to keep this agenda at the forefront of people's minds. The HE Toolkit, I think, is helpful. I think it will be helpful, particularly because it covers the whole span of considerations and issues that we all need to be thinking about in relation to climate change and sustainability. but it gives a menu within which each institution can then work out, so what do we need to do next? What do we need to focus on? What do we need to prioritize? And that will vary from case to case. So I think it's very valuable as a prompt to all of us to think, right, across everything that you could be doing and should be doing within your climate change and sustainability strategy, what do you actually want to focus on next? And I think that's its value for us, because without in any way underestimating the size of the mountain we have still to climb, I think in the university we're feeling that we've got good progress running on the curriculum, building sustainability and climate change awareness into the curriculum, in our own estate management, in our partnerships, in making this an issue for discussion at our council and so on. The big issue for us now is scope 3. And what are we going to do to hit a target in anything like a meaningful timescale to reduce our scope 3 emissions? So the toolkit has helped us to say, right, that's our next area of focus, and it is difficult. It will challenge our whole operating model. If we're really saying we do not want staff and students to use cars as much as they do now, big issue. If we do not want international students flying in and out, big issue. There are some major challenges just sitting in that area of scope 3. So what I think this has helped us do is just sort of work out, where do we want to focus next? What do we want to prioritize? Just finally on Joy's question. So who was it that said that targets were only somewhat useful? I was one, because targets can be useful if owned. And one of the things that I think is really important for the ongoing work of the Commission, we know from experience in our sectors, FE and HE, the imposition of targets on us by others sometimes doesn't work. It doesn't always land well. The derivation of targets we believe in and we own and we share within our institution is a different matter, and that can have enormous value in focusing minds and giving us a sense of scale and ambition. So yes, targets can be really helpful, but they have to be owned and they have to be meaningful to the people charged with delivering them. So overall, I think big thank you to the Commission. I think you're doing great work. I think it's important work. I think it's helping us to keep the faith and keep this agenda at the top of people's minds. And I look forward to continuing to work with colleagues on this agenda. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much for that. As always, very insightful. And you rightly throw out the challenge of scope 3, not just for yourself and your own institution, but indeed for all of us. There are also lots of great challenges appearing in the chat that are there. And if we're not able to get back to them and interact with them today, then we will take them away and be sure that we'll be paying attention to them as the Commission carries on its work. And I can see one on diversity there as well, which we'll take on board, and others as well. So thank you for those. Steve, I think probably now's the time to move on.
I do. I was looking at the questions and I said to Mel and Stephen, we might well have some, but I've been given a gentle reminder, Joy, that we do need to move on. But as you say, we can take those questions through the chat. I think that there were some really useful ones on diversity, some really good ones on targets. And I think Stephen made the point there that which would take off 2 of the questions around ownership. And I think that's absolutely correct. I mean, going back to Mel and listening to Mel, I think, yeah, Mel's got, I know, a series of embedded targets which are board specific to her institution. And I think that's the answer around all of those. So can I just thank Mel and Stephen very kindly for their observations. Please do keep the chat comments coming and the challenge and questions in there, because they're a very rich source, and we will use all of those later. But I've been told I'm handing back to Sonia now, Joy, and our little piece is over. And we can pick up all of that in the dialogue sessions later on, can't we? Thank you, Joy. And thanks again to Mel and Stephen. Sonia, okay. Back to you.
I'll take over, Steve. So just thanks to you and Joy and to Mel and Stephen for those very interesting observations from Mel and Stephen. Delighted to see that the activities are already resonating within those institutions and helping, as Stephen has commented on, priority setting and what's next in the agenda. But now we need to move on, as is always the case. There's loads of questions we'd like to debate, but time now for me to introduce a fellow commissioner, Professor Judith Petts, who's the Vice Chancellor of the University of Plymouth, who will take us through the anticipation we have for the year up to COP. Judith.
Okay, thank you very much, Jim, and good morning to everybody. I want to do a couple of things here, is just to talk about the Commission and its commitment to the next year, but we're also going to run another poll because we want to understand what you think we should focus on in the next year, particularly in the run-up to COP26. So, but just to reflect, when we set the Commission up, we were, quotes, a year away from COP26, which of course it was due to be starting now, in fact, in 2020. So we set off with ambitions around a sort of target of November 2020. And the most important thing to say is that we are now retargeting ourselves to November and December 2021, which is when COP26 will now happen. I think we set off with a very high view that it is the duty of the further and higher education sectors to tackle the crisis as educators of the leaders of tomorrow, and we've discussed that in relation to our students particularly, and thank you to our student commissions who've been great all year. As of course universities and colleges who are opinion shapers, not just through our research, and you'll see the work that's we're doing on the research mapping of 188 plus sectors, research centres now, but I would add to that our national and international roles. And we probably have said less today about our international role in our sectors, but of course COP26 will be an ideal opportunity to remind ourselves of the role of UK institutions internationally in what we do and what we influence and how we bring change about internationally. And of course, as Jim referred to, as organisations employing significant numbers of staff, we have large estates and we have complex supply chains. And I think that last issue is the one that's behind these useful targets. For me, sector targets are really interesting indicators, but you have to adapt them to your own specific context of your institution, how you operate, where you operate, what you do, and importantly, bring everyone in your institution to work around those targets. They can't be set by other people and then just taken for granted that somehow they apply to your own institution. So we have acknowledged the challenges the sectors face and over the past 7 months, and particularly during the COVID pandemic, which of course is ongoing. And despite those obstacles, I would say that as the sectors, we've seen a significant working together in the amazing number of events and workshops and discussion meetings that we've held. We've had absolutely stunning participation by people all the way through, despite everything they're trying to balance in their everyday life. And we have made meaningful steps and to reaching the net emission targets. But we're proud of the resilience of the sector and the work that's being done, but there's more to be done. So we're going to commit, and I think the wording was on the slide that you just saw, to continuing to support the sector and should say sectors to set and meet their ambitious targets and accelerate our progress towards achieving net zero emissions. And of course, as Lord Deben was saying, it's not just net zero emissions. We all have to adapt our whole way of life as well as achieve net zero emissions if we're going to be able to live with the sorts of climates we will have in the future. So we have COP26 now on a roadmap, and we'd like to ask a few questions about what you would like us to prioritise on with yourselves. This is not just us in the Commission, with the whole sectors and our student populations. and they are here. Firstly, engaging directly with the sector to support implementation of the roadmap for FE and the toolkit, which you've seen produced by Steve and by Joy. Ensuring education has a voice within the official COP26 programme, which of course is still being developed. Sharing relevant information about COP26 to the sector itself and across our sectors. Having an event around COP26, but not necessarily within it, which could focus obviously as an outcome from all the work done, and a looking forward as to what still needs to be done, and achieving discussion and buy-in to that. And then supporting the sectors themselves to have a green recovery. And of course, linked to that will be adaptation. Now, it says multiple choice and top priorities. So I assume, Sonia, that people can tick all 5 if they want. It would be most useful to have some sense of the real priorities from you, because I suspect all 5 may be important to people. But if we could run the poll to see the key things in there out of those 5, we'll just leave a few seconds for people to read those. Then please do submit your answers, and we will just have a brief discussion then of the outcomes of the poll. So over to you to submit.
I'll share the results in 10 seconds. We have 80% response right now.
Right. Okay, so all results are in, Sonia?
Most results are in, over 80%.
All right,
Really
okay.
nice.
Just leave it for a few more seconds. Someone's just written that they voted for one option. Always read the question carefully. I don't think it's a student either, but it's the advice we give to all our students.
Voting stopped now, so
stops now. Right, so really interesting here, a focus particularly on supporting the sector and supporting implementation of the roadmap for FE and the toolkit for HE. So together, a strong sense of ongoing work to provide support, information, and mechanisms to enable each institution to do their own thing within their own context to the best possible outcomes. And I think, as was stressed in both the roadmap and especially the HE toolkit, that's an ongoing toolkit. It will be added to, it will be revised, it will be adapted as people have new resources that are useful to share, etc. So that sense of support there coming out very strongly. The voice thing coming out very strongly, ensuring we have a voice within the official COP26 programme. And that has been something that we had to almost stop talking about, obviously, as soon as we realised that COP26 wouldn't go ahead. I know many institutions, and particularly many of those research centres that are on the map already, have had serious discussions with the research councils. I think we have someone from one of the research councils on the call today. Discussions with the research councils, with BAYES and with Research England also about the role of universities, certainly in official COP26. So clearly, thank you for that priority, and we certainly picked that one up. And then the 2 lesser scores there, but having an event around COP26, but not within it. We'll need to think about that balance, and also ensuring that what voice we can have within the official COP26, and then seeing if there's anything that needs to be added to that to extend that discussion opportunity around the time frame of COP26, and then sharing information to the sector. Probably a lower take up here, because certainly within the sector and across the research centres in particular, for the HE sector, I know huge amount of understanding and engagement in the COP26. So thank you very much for those, and we will certainly carry on with the whole sense of support, but that support has to come from your contributions and ideas, because this isn't this is a support to how you can do the work yourself. And I think that's the most crucial thing to come out of our discussions so far. Now, I think, and we're running a bit late, we're going to take a 5-minute break to get a cup of coffee and take some exercise, but it truly is 5 minutes. And then Sonia again is going to get us into some breakout groups for some discussions for about 20 minutes for the rest of the morning. So time for a quick refill of the coffee or teacup, and then Sonia will get us into some discussion groups. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Judith. So we'll meet back at 11:25.
I've got Tom at 12:30 to talk to you about Mr. Taylor. That's right. This should finish at 12.
Okay, I'll wait a few more seconds before we continue. Okay, so I am now going to hand it over to Jim to introduce this breakout room, and then we'll go off into the rooms and discuss the question and come back and discuss our key takeaways. Jim, are you there? Not yet. Jim, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce the breakout rooms now.
Okay, we got enough people back online. I can see the numbers improving. They're 46 so far back online. So colleagues, we're now moving into the discussion phase, where we will go into six rooms, each with a facilitator. We're asking the question, how has climate action changed in this past year? And what now needs to be done? Thinking about all of the things that we've been discussing. What are the actions that we need to take? And we have on screen now some prompts and reflections that might help inform the debate. We're going to ask that the facilitator brings back your 2 key points that will be the takeaway from your discussion. So we've got around about 15, let me just check again, around about 20 minutes or so for this conversation. And if you're ready to pop us into the breakout room, Sonia, then off we go. And we will return and discuss the findings later.
And each breakout room is facilitated by an institutional and student commissioner. So I'm going to send you all off into your rooms now. Welcome back, everyone. I hope those breakout rooms were helpful.
Okay, I guess we're all back in the main part of the room. What each facilitator has been asked to do is to identify 2 key takeaways from the breakout room discussions. I will kick off as I have the mic open. So we had a really interesting conversation, diverse array of organizations in our room. A big issue now is to enthuse and enable leadership by vice chancellors and college principals to actually take the messages of the Climate Commission and to work in partnership with others to amplify the array of actions that are being taken, but equally increasing the pace of those actions. 2030 is very close, and we need vice chancellors and college principals to step up, to speak loudly and boldly about urgency and about the need for pace, recognizing that very many institutions are still emergent within the climate debate. And so we need to help them to feel capable and confident to have those conversations. Joy, can I come to you for your two points?
Yeah, you're a hard taskmaster, Jim. We've got loads of exciting things to say, but I will restrain myself. So number one, COVID-19 has shown that radical change is possible and can and must be strategic in the way it's applied. And the second one is management and leadership are much more interested. I think you said something similar, but co-creation is key. And this is difficult with a continuously changing student body.
Sorry, good points. Thank you. Steve.
Fiona was kind enough. Oh, thanks, Fiona.
I'll cover Steve's one. In terms of the key one was sort of the strategy, and the strategic leadership hasn't really changed, but many are in the process of getting things approved or getting new plans put in place. And the group felt that the pandemic hadn't affected that leadership, so that's good to hear. Also, it was a positive reaction in terms of engagement with students and staff in the providing solutions and hope. And I think sort of with the pandemic that has been very much sort of appreciated and a good way to engage people on that co-creation of solutions for the climate.
Okay. Judith, I think you were one of our facilitators.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps a different point to add was a reflection on the current situation across institutions, particularly around financial sustainability, and perhaps a pressure from some of our governors and decision makers to ensure we are financially sustainable. And therefore, how can we show the opportunities around a green sustainability and low carbon? The case studies and examples will help us to show that there isn't a divergence between financial sustainability and green sustainability. And perhaps we could work up some case studies. And linked to that, there was the point perhaps we haven't talked about, which is about the internationalization of our universities and of our student populations. And linking also to financial sustainability, because they are inherent to our financial sustainability. And therefore that conversation of how we operate overseas and how that relates to being as less resource intensive when we're operating overseas, but what it means for online delivery and the development of international education, particularly online, transnational, etc. So perhaps 2 slightly different points to add to the mix from the other groups.
Thank you very much, Judith. I've deliberately waited till the end to invite our students to, our student governors to report back from their breakout rooms. Manvir, can I start with you?
Sure, thank you, Jim. To echo Judith's point, I think our group reflected on the lack of resourcing towards the climate emergency given the strains at the moment, but that in spite of that, it's a good time to actually have certain conversations, in particular around travel policies, going to work, going to conferences, conversations that perhaps wouldn't have been so palatable beforehand. And as a second point, I think we had a good discussion around adaptation and the fact that it's not quite as fashionable as a lot of the discussion around mitigation, but that it's important to consider, particularly because it's something that we will need to consider. And if we can do that as early as possible, we can start to predict what we might need to do and plan, be that with an example such as like retrofitting buildings, looking at our cooling demands in the future. So yeah, that's probably a summary from my group.
Thanks, and great to hear adaptation being mentioned in our feedback. Absolutely critical. And finally, Marta, your points.
Yeah, also for us was a really interesting discussion and really similar stories there. I think what we talked a lot was about the restructuring the sustainability boards across the university level. So how both university managed to kind of distance, to move from a board that was linked to estates or was linked to health and safety and move more as an independent team across the whole university. That was a really interesting thing. And the other one was trying to move towards even a more holistic approach of how university can actually embed the sustainability, not only from few departments, but at a general, as a holistic approach. That was my point, our point.
Thank you very much indeed, Marta, and all our facilitators. Some really important observations emerging from those conversations. What we as a commission of students and leaders need to do is to take those observations, as we will do from all of the other chat comments that have been made, all of the other observations that have emerge from the conversations we've heard from all the voices participating today. There's an enormous amount of very helpful commentary that we will digest and help prioritize, look at the poll results to work out how we can respond to all of those different initiatives. But what's come across to me is the sense, the powerful sense of how the institutions in HE and FE working together can make real progress on this agenda, how we can move at pace with urgency and knowing that our students, they expect it, they demand it, and if we don't do it, they will be upset doesn't even carry anywhere near enough weight, but they will be demanding action of us, and we need to ensure that the leadership of institutions understand and take the thought leadership role that is the historic mission of higher and further education. So I think, colleagues, mindful that we are surprisingly just a few minutes early, this is probably a first for anything I've ever chaired, that I think we have come to the end of our 1 year on event. We, as the commissioners, will go away and with our steering group colleagues from AOC, from Guild HE and from UUK, we'll go away and we will spend time, but not too much time, because it is an emergency, working out what we do next and speaking to the sector to make sure this is combined sector. When I say sector, I do mean FE and HE together, that we work at pace and that we share and we speak with institutions and we speak to power as well with a combined voice. Well over 5 million students and staff and a budget of 44 billion. This was pre-COVID, it might be slightly different now. But what that means is if we can use those resources differently, we don't need necessarily more resource, we need to use it differently. And that's part of the challenge for us, to work out how best to use all of those tools at our disposal to bring them forward at pace, to make sure that they are embedded into institutions and that priorities are both understood, shared and worked on. So with that, colleagues, can I thank you very much indeed. A thank you to our participants for their insights and contributions. My thanks to all of those that have helped today run very smoothly. And of course to Sonia and Fiona, who as ever are in the background, or in some cases the foreground, helping to make this event a great success. So with that, can I say to take care, colleagues, do make sure to look after yourself in these strange times, and you will hear from us again with new insights and new challenges. So thank you very much indeed to all of you. And with that, I'll say thank you and goodbye.